Anna, thank you so much for being part of helping me get my homework done for our presentation to the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators. Anna, would you mind just sharing, just introducing yourself and the school that you work that you lead?
Hi, my name's Anna Warmbrand, and I'm the principal of Gallego Intermediate Fine Arts Magnet in the Sunnyside Unified School District. We're here in Tucson, Arizona, and I serve a community of about 900 students, fourth through eighth grade. And something that's super special about Gallego is we're all artists. We are the Fine and Performing Arts Magnet.
It's a beautiful school, and the school I've had a chance to work with in developing your positive behavior intervention and supports matrix. And just for the sake of this presentation, would you mind just sharing when did you first encounter the 10 questions for ensuring equity in school discipline?
About 15 minutes ago, Tim.
Perfect, perfect. About 15 minutes ago. And so we'll have a chance to see how they actually work in real life to help us do some reflecting and thinking on how we might make more equitable school environments. All right, so let's just dive into it. We'll dive in with question one. Question one, what is the expectation? So what is the expectation that's on your mind tonight?
An expectation that's on my mind tonight is that when our students are in instructional practice on a remote platform, that the teacher expects that students stay muted
Mhm.
during instructional time unless they are called upon, or if they'd like to share, they can put it in a chat or raise their hand, but they are to stay muted, at least when the whole group is together.
So during whole group instruction, the entire class is supposed to remain on mute. The only time that they're allowed to not be on mute is if a teacher explicitly says so.
Correct.
Okay. So why is this the expectation? Here's moving into question two. Why is that the expectation?
Well, it's the expectation because when the kids are unmuted, it can become a really distracting environment on a virtual platform because you're able to hear the sounds of everyone's households all at once.
Mhm.
And that can be a distraction for discussions that are happening with kids or with adults. And so the sound can make it difficult for folks to focus.
So the intent of it was to really just support order in a digital learning environment, just to make it so that everyone could hear what the instructor was saying.
Yes, and to hear what anyone else is sharing.
Mhm. So, and also to hear what anyone else is sharing. Okay. Who decided, here's question three then. Who decided that this expectation was necessary?
Well, I think we had a staff collective discussion about 2 weeks. I think it was our second staff meeting,
Mhm.
2 weeks into remote learning, when it became apparent, both at our meetings as adults as well as with kids in class, that if we didn't have everyone muted, it became extremely difficult to share ideas and focus on one task.
So way back when, early into pandemic land, when we were all getting used to the tools and how they worked and how sound on Zoom is or Google Meets is, or whatever the platform might be, there was just some discovery that if everybody is talking and all the background noise happens, that it just isn't working. And that the who of it, though, the who decided it was staff. There was a staff
Yeah.
meeting, and the staff got together and decided, okay, well,
Yeah.
were families involved in that conversation?
No,
Were students
families
involved?
were not. No, students and families were not. We made a decision
Mhm.
as a staff to do that piece. And then we did, after we made the decision, we did share the decision
Mhm.
with stakeholders and eventually in the parent forum.
Mhm. So
Um,
yeah, and right now, there's no judgment
yeah.
necessarily. It's just noting that the part of question three is that in the who,
Mhm.
an important part is also, of course, just for equity, knowing who wasn't there, right?
Right.
Whose voice wasn't part of that. And
Mhm.
that happens a lot in schools, that there's a need to make a decision kind of quickly. There's an urgency felt. We make it, and our community often entrusts us to do that. So sometimes. All right. So the next question, question five, or excuse me, question four. What do you believe about that expectation that students be on mute unless they're specifically called upon by their teacher?
I think that it is beneficial in many contexts. I also know that it can prohibit
Mhm.
students from feeling free to share, and also could create some obstacles for some kiddos who don't have certain features operating in their programming. And it is definitely not um, the type of discourse protocols that you would want to have in person. And so getting as close to those pieces as possible, even on a remote platform, is ideal.
So you're as you're thinking about your own beliefs, you're recognizing that, yeah, we can't have 40 students on a call. Just the audio just doesn't work that way in the digital platform. And at the same time, you're wrestling with just, well, there's students that feel like they don't have a voice, or they might choose not to speak if now there's an extra. I'm sorry, I might be saying more than you said, but you said that there's a sense of order, but also that there's some just maybe
Barriers.
some barrier, some stickiness to being able to participate in the dialogue, which at Gallego I just know is kind of a hallmark of what makes your school special. Okay, let's move into this next one. Whose values then? Whose values are reflected and reinforced by this expectation?
Well, I think that the values of the teachers and then those stakeholders that value having a certain sense of order in their instructional practice, because now um, we definitely, it's something that is exemplified in basically all the remote adult interactions
Mhm.
in a variety of contexts. Like, it doesn't matter if you're at a district meeting or a parent meeting or meeting with children or teaching children or whatever it may be. Um, unless you're in a small group, pretty much everyone is muted.
So there's sense. So when you think about the students and families in your school, and you think about kind of the structures, then whoever's in charge of the meeting is kind of in charge of who speaks.
Hmm.
Okay. Whose values then, moving into question 6, whose values might be erased by this expectation?
Well, um, the values of folks who like don't get called on and their questions and
Mhm.
positions aren't shared or are in the chat. So essentially, it does not give participants um, freedom to be able to share when they want to share.
Mhm. So any participant who wanted to contribute to the dialogue has a barrier now to doing so. And the value, I mean, not even so much speaking of their values, but their value added to the conversation, then there's some barriers there is a barrier.
There is literally a barrier to them being able to freely contribute.
The mute all is the barrier for sure. Okay. Now let's think about this next one and I just really appreciate your vulnerability and your thinking, because certainly as school leaders we're wrestling with this all the time. We have these expectations that were created to serve a purpose, and now we have an opportunity with the 10 questions to think through, well, what else is happening now too? And thank you for just your willingness to reflect this way. It's just why I asked you. Honestly, I knew you would. Let's think about the question 7 then. Who would have difficulty meeting this expectation? The expectation that you be on mute unless your teacher calls on you. Who at your school is going to have difficulty doing that?
Students that
I almost,
have,
Anna, I just want to stop you for a second. I see you behind your eyes. You actually have like names and of kids in your mind, don't you? You know who they are, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So tell me. So yeah, we're not going to do names here, obviously, but who's going to have difficulty meeting the expectation of staying on mute unless a teacher calls on them?
Students that um, love to spontaneously share.
Mhm. So students who are just, they're going to talk. They're going to talk because that's just part of who they are.
Mhm.
Okay.
And in um, an in-person setting, you can't mute them. You have to work with them to help them express how you operate in a large group of people with those impulses. And so by muting children, those kids that are naturally impulsively wanting to share and who have so many things that they want to say are not um, assisted in growing in how to build that skill set for a larger group setting because they're just simply muted.
So
So you're
basically, anybody
losing,
who wants to talk, like just nope, you're muted, and there's no opportunity really to even learn how to engage that give and take in a diverse community because you just it's not even an option.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not an option. So you're missing a learning opportunity um, for kids who may be really eager to participate.
And they might have something to say. You might have something to say. And you would have to. That's interesting to think about that because in an in-person setting, if you were an instructor of that student in an in-person setting, there is no mute button. There isn't.
No,
You have to engage that student for who they are. And it's almost it is very easy in many respects in the digital environment to do the opposite thing. Okay. Well, let's think. This is an interesting thing because that moves us right into question number 8. What would happen if this expectation didn't exist? If it just didn't exist, so there's no expectation that you be on mute. Or better yet, let's just say, what if it were technologically impossible? There was no mute all button. What if you just couldn't do it? What would have to happen?
well, what would have to happen is we'd have to really work with kids to positively support practices that are respectful and mindful of what kids want to say and when. Just as you would practice when you start, with primary grades centers and how you rotate. So you give them vocabulary that would help them to be respectful learners on the remote platform. The hardest part would be asking the kids to proactively control their at home learning environment,
Mhm.
right? So that you're also not hearing whoever else is in the household doing whatever they have to do, which may be really legitimate. And depending what space you're sharing, could be really difficult and challenging.
Mhm.
Um, Earphones definitely help, right? So that's a resource that you would need. Um, but just having some mindfulness of the outside factors that isn't just the kids' behavior is going to be important.
I love it because you're already kind of thinking about questions 9 and 10. Honestly, is question 8 is just like let's just imagine what's the worst thing that would happen if all of a sudden mute all just didn't exist anymore. Well, I mean, probably it'd be pretty loud. I mean, at first, and then we'd have to figure it out. We'd have to, as instructors, really figure it out somehow. How are we going to converse with each other in a learning environment where the instructor can't just silence everybody's voice with a button? And so, thinking that about question 9, how could this expectation that you be on mute unless I say so be revised to accommodate all cultures, all sets of values? Or perhaps question 10, Should we just not have this expectation anymore? Because it erases people from the dialogue. Where might you land on that?
Well, that's a difficult one for me. Can you go over question 9 again? Because I'm really
Absolutely.
thinking about 10.
Yeah, because question 9 is, well, there's some problems with it. There's some issues of people being silenced who we wouldn't want to be silenced and couldn't if we were doing in-person learning. And so question 9 invites us to, could we revise it to make sure that everyone's included? Question 10 is, no, we can't. It's just fundamentally broken. We need to get rid of it.
I think there definitely can be some revision to be looked at. I think that, like anything, having an either or, like it will be this way or it will be this way, is not probably a healthy perspective to take in an ever changing school situation. Um, I think that there needs to be probably some times throughout the 2 hour blocks
Mhm,
that aren't just the breakout rooms, because in breakout groups and in small group learning at my school site, there isn't an expectation that students are muted.
mhm,
It's actually their time to be together and discuss and get their important work done in a really organic manner on a remote platform. So it would be interesting to try certain parts of the students' direct instructional time when they're with the teacher, all of them together,
mhm,
to see if there would be some organic or healthy times that kids could just be unmuted and let it flow. Like um, when you're doing like a would you rather
mhm,
uh, to start off your practice, or if you do dedications like at the beginning or end of the class period, that could be um, an important time to practice and to work on everyone not being muted,
mhm.
to see if those times could be utilized to teach just some the basic online manners of how we take turns and what that looks like. And I know it would be challenging, but I think all of transforming school on a remote platform is challenging.
It's interesting too, because now I'm thinking sort of the beyondness of this, that idea. Try it. Let's find out and see what happens. Let's see if we could expand. Let's see if we could actually, model for our students the, what if you controlled your own mute button and you just knew you needed to when the blender was going off in the kitchen or something like that. Like that would be that's a really different way than saying, no, don't worry, kids. I got this. I'm your teacher. Mute all. Done. That's a really interesting thing to think about. So, Anna, I just now that we've kind of reached the end of questions 1 through 10 here, I'm wondering, from your perspective, having really just gone through them with an expectation we just thought about right now, uh, what do you see as is the power of them?
I think that the power of the question um, lies in that they are able to guide you through a vulnerable type of an analysis of systems that you have.
So do you really, it was the guidance. It was that it's to do something like this requires some vulnerability, and the questions were supportive. One of the things that I saw on you too is that as we kind of move through questions 1 through 10, you were already thinking through of, well, now that I know what I think about this, what I believe about this, what I feel about this, you seem to get some clarity about, well, what ought we do? And it sounds like, well, what we ought to do is to think of those small moments where let's try let's try the nobody's on mute way, and let's see what we can do to support students in figuring out, what the etiquette is in this new kind of learning space. It was really kind of neat to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. This was fun.
I appreciate it.